Hello and welcome to Digital Photo Mentor weekly live stream. I'm Darlene. I'm the creator of Digital Photo Mentor, and every week I broadcast live here at this time and I demonstrate photo editing. I alternate between working with Lightroom and Photoshop and Neo, as well as some other plugins and things that I use in my own workflow like Topaz. Today is exclusively Luminar Neo demonstration day. So I'm going to be using images that have been submitted by my readers and subscribers. And we're going to be taking a look at how we're going to edit them and approach that. So I'll show you my process, what I look at when I edit an image, and why I'm doing things, as well as the hows. So not just the tools that I use, but why I do it, how far to go, and how far is too far. So we've got a lot of regulars in the chat, and I see a lot of new faces or new names as well. So we've got Marty from Wisconsin. I've got your image, Marty. It looks like a cave or something that you sent me. And my husband, Rob, you'll see is in the chat. So you'll be noticing his comments, and he'll provide links to things that I mentioned, other videos that are referenced to something, or articles on our website that are relevant to what I'm talking about today. And we're also really excited to welcome Phil Steele readers. So if you are coming from Phil Steele's email, let us know in the chat, and we welcome you to the broadcast today. Brandon from Calgary, welcome. So we've got a lot of my current Luminar Neo course students that I already recognize, and a lot of new people, right? James from Indiana, welcome. Rec R8, recreate, very clever. Welcome. Stephanie from sunny warm Oregon, welcome. Dave's Thrown Together channel. Welcome, Dave. Edwards, nice to see you. Also, one of my Luminar Neo students, and Holly Linton. We haven't seen you for a while. Vicky, Robin, lots of new faces. Awesome. So it's great that you are all joining from different places. Phil Steele introduced me to you. Awesome. Well, thanks, Holly. That's good to know. I did not know that. That's wonderful. So thanks to Phil Steele for introducing me to all of you if you are new. And as I'm going through here, if you are already a current student of my Luminar Neo course, let the other people know what you thought of the course. So without further ado, I'm going to mention this is a link that you can, before I get into Luminar Neo, this is the link that you can use to submit images to me. So you don't have to be a member of anything. You don't have to be a student. I do recommend that you subscribe to this channel and also set notifications, because then ring that little bell, because then it will let you know, or YouTube will let you know when I'm live or when there's a new video. But you could submit your images and have me edit them. So next week we'll be doing Lightroom, and we're doing a special guest next week. And then the following week will be Luminar again. And you'll have a chance when you submit your images to let me know which software you use. And that's the one that I'll use to if I choose to work on your image. So without further ado, I want to hop over into Neo and get started. All right, let me make myself a little bit smaller here. There we go. All right, so I've got some great submitted images here. And let me just see. I'm gonna do an edit, and I'm gonna keep track of some questions, sort of things, after I do one edit or I do a section. All right. So I've got one of Marty's images that he sent. That's one of the cave. And I think I've got one of yours, Stephanie. Is this one yours? Yeah, one of Stephanie's that I thought might be really cool to do as well. But I want to start with this one because I already did an edit on this one. Oh, I don't want to show you guys what I did. Give it away. I want to do an edit on this one because it was submitted by. Now I'm really sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. So I'd love to know, if you are watching, how to pronounce it. So the name is Kyvu, Kyvu. So I don't know if that's pronounced correctly. I'm sorry if I'm murdering that, but this is a really lovely image of this butterfly but this is my edited version. So I've done this one backwards. Let me show you what I've done to it in the original, and then I'm going to show you how I got here. And of course, my Adobe wants to update. No, thank you, Adobe. We're not going to do that now. We're busy. All right, so ready to see the before image? Oops, I got to get back in my cursor over here to Luminar. Here we go. All right, so before is that. All right, so who wants to know how I made that out of this image? All right, so let me dig in. How many of you, because we've got a lot of new viewers today, how many of you are brand new to Luminar Neo, right? There's lots of older versions of Luminar 4, Luminar AI, that they've got, a big promotion on Luminar right now. So if you are watching and you haven't bought Luminar Neo, if you could just pop our link into the chat as well, Rob. So if you are not currently a Luminar Neo user, now might be the time to get it, because if you have an older version, you can actually get it for $49 US right now, 64 something like that if you're a brand new user, right? So Holly says Adobe is jealous tonight. Yes, they are jealous because we're not using any Adobe tonight. All right, so what I did here, and I'm going to go backwards, like I said, and I'm going to show you the edits, and then I'm going to undo them, right? So in Luminar Neo, your edits are now shown in this panel over here called edits, and you can actually sort of take steps. Let me turn my cursor highlight on. There we go. You can actually take steps to go back. So I can go back and show you what I did in the original develop panel. I don't think that I did anything here actually. And then you can see that I did some structure, and I'll go through and show you how I did this, because I use this to blur the background and sharpen the butterfly. Okay. Then I used a tool called Color Harmony. I added a dark edge vignette. I added some more softening to the background, and then another vignette. And over here on the left are layers. Okay. So if you're coming from Luminar AI, there was no layers, and now we have layers again. So that is actually really wonderful. And I added one of my bokeh overlay as a layer, and it does a really nice job here of sort of darkening the image a little bit overall. Okay, and I can edit this layer as well. Okay, so I can make it less intense or more intense. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to revert this image back to the original and then show you my process of how I got there. You can see that I also cropped it quite a bit. So I did the cropping first because there's a lot of stuff up here that's just sort of distracting, right? I want to show you, I'm actually going to be doing a video on this, but I want to show you a really neat little trick that I demonstrate in the course, and I talk about this in my Photoshop course, I think, as well, is looking at your image upside down will help you actually determine where you need to edit, okay? Because your eye will go to areas of 4 different things. Let me grab my little banner here. Okay, so there's 4 things that will grab your attention. It's going across the bottom of the screen now for you. Okay, and these are things that you want to avoid in the background or that aren't the subject. So that's areas of brightness, contrast, sharpness, and intense color. So when we look at that and talk about this image, we can see that there's lots of sort of contrast down here in this grass area. There's some bright orange and colors here. And this area is fairly light, right? So I know that I want to deal with a lot of this, and the simplest way to do that in this case is honestly to just crop it out, right? So I'm going to start by using this crop AI button here, this purple one, and the program will analyze your image and crop it how it thinks it should be cropped. And I talk about this in the course as well, is I find that it usually does a pretty good job of the amount of cropping, but you'll notice that I just rearranged the positioning, okay? I'm actually going to come in probably a little bit more because I like to watch the corners, and you can see there's this sort of bright area on the corner here still. So I'm going to come in just a tiny bit more, but other than that, I'm pretty happy with the crop that it suggested. And I use a lot of keyboard shortcuts, okay? So I'm going to use Enter to accept the crop. Now that I'm looking at it again, see this little purple part on the corner here that's bright and this little bit on the upper corner? I'm going to use my keyboard shortcut to open the crop tool. That's C. Rob, if you could please share a link in the chat to download our free keyboard shortcut. Right, so we have a PDF that you can download for Luminar Neo keyboard shortcuts. That's part of the course as well if you are in the course. Okay, so I'm actually going to come in a little bit more to get rid of that light bit on the corner over here on the left and this one on the top. Okay, enter. I still got a little bit of light bits up here, but I'm going to deal with that in a different way. Okay, so that's why I'm approaching it the way I did. Okay. The next thing I want to do is I want to start to do some basic developing. I've got the histogram on. If you do not see the histogram in Luminar Neo, just go to View and Show Histogram, and it will appear right below actually above the crop tool, pardon me. It shows above the crop tool. If you don't have that option, just make sure that you have the latest version. Okay, so make sure that you go do check for updates. As of today, version 1.0.7 is the latest update. If you want to share a link to a video I did on the last update, please, Rob. And the only thing that was added in the last update that was really a major thing or a minor thing, honestly, was this little favorite section here. Right. So if you've seen me edit before with Neo, you'll know that Mystical is my favorite and Color Harmony, which is usually way down the bottom here. Right. So I've added those as my favorites. So they appear at the top. Okay. I may actually add Portrait Bokeh as well because I use that one a lot too, and the portrait tools. Right. So the first thing I'm going to do then is go into Develop Raw because this is a raw file. Okay. And this is the only place where you will see camera profiles. Okay, so whatever camera the person used to photograph them, this image, now I could probably find out if I look at the info here. So get this little info panel. Okay, this is an NEF file, so it's a Nikon camera. Okay. And when we open this here, these are now Nikon camera profiles, right? So usually what I'll do is I'll try and choose one of these that makes the image look better right out of the gate. Now notice when I did that, the color got really intense, okay? And I haven't done anything else. I just chose landscape, right? Let me try neutral. Vivid, I'm afraid, is going to be too vibrant. That's pretty punchy. I'm not so crazy about that, right? Portrait's a little flatter, right? So can you see how these would apply to different images, right? I don't mind standard. Okay, flat's obviously going to be very flat. Let us go with, let's go with the landscape one. It's a little bit more punchy and saturated than I would like, but we can solve that, okay? But look at the big difference that it makes, okay? If I'm just looking at this image, doesn't want to give me a before and after here. It really punches up the colors. Okay. Now I'm looking at this histogram and it's really nicely spread out. So there's nothing that I need to worry about in terms of contrast. If you want your highlight clipping warnings, those are now available, Holly. So just for you, they've added the clipping warnings. So now you can start using Luminar Neo and you can just turn them on with these little circles here and they would appear. You can see there's a really small one right here. So you can see the red highlight here on the flower. That means that that area is clipping or the highlight area is too bright to maintain detail. Right? So I'm just going to pull the highlight slider down a little bit and see if I can't solve that. Okay, see now there's no clippings. So all I did was pull that down a little bit and I'd solve my clipping problem. Okay, now the other thing that I noticed now that I've zoomed in is there's a little bit of noise here. I'm going to come in to 200% just so I can accentuate it. Can you see there's a little bit of noise there? Right. Inside, we're still in the develop raw section. Okay. Remember, there is a noise reduction. Okay. There's a lot of other tools down in here, and I want to look at noise reduction. Okay. So this is going to apply onto the raw part of the file. Okay. So if you can do some noise reduction at the beginning, you're going to have a better option and better looking image. But I want to make sure that I'm not going too far, because when you do a lot of noise reduction, it basically just blurs the whole thing. Okay, so see how the butterfly was a lot sharper? So noise reduction works in that it's causing a blur to try and blend in the noise. So you have to make this balance between noise reduction and adding a little bit of sharpness, right? Now notice when I added sharpness, we got some clippings back again. Okay, so then I'd have to go back up here and lower the highlights a little bit more, or maybe the overall exposure. Okay, so now I've still got a tiny little bit of clippings. That's better. Okay, we're getting close. So see how this, I want to make sure it's up that say editing is a dance, because that's one of the things that I already talk about, okay, is that you have this dance between doing one slider and one adjustment, coming back and doing another. Okay, so I see there is a question. Where is Heather's question? What is clipping? Okay, did I answer that question, Heather? So clipping means that either in the highlight or the shadow areas, there's no detail. So where you see these little red marks, okay, is no detail. So if I put this slider back, that means that I would have no detail in the butterfly. Okay, so when you see that, that's a warning. Okay, so I've just taken it to extreme just to show you. Now, if I want to have more in the black area, I'm going to show you what clipping looks like in the black area. Okay, you'll see blue warnings. Okay, so red means the highlight is clipping, blue means the black is clipping. Okay, generally my goal is I want to have a little bit of the shadows clipping, because that will actually intensify your colors. So when you have strong contrast like pure white and pure black, your colors will actually appear more saturated. Okay, let me turn the clipping warnings off for a second here. And I noticed that somebody gave the keyboard shortcut there. That's Leah. So yes, you are correct, Leah. Lee, pardon me. That this is the keyboard shortcut is J, right? So let me just turn this off again. So watch what happens when I drag the blacks up. Okay, see how it darkens everything. So I'm increasing the black, but it also intensifies the color. Okay, can you see that? So if your colors are washed out, it probably just means you need a little bit more black in your image. So I very, very rarely, if ever, touch a saturation slider. Almost never. If I do, I'm usually going negative, not plus. Okay, so I'm going to zoom back in here again. I've got a little bit of noise reduction, and I've got a little bit of sharpening, but I'm going to turn the mask up fairly high. Now, what this masking slider does on the sharpening is it's not sharpening the areas that are smooth. So the areas like the background that are out of focus, or areas of solid color where I want the noise reduction to apply the most, it's not going to add sharpening, because without it, let me show you what happens. If I add full sharpening, right, it's sharpening the noise. Let me just zoom in here. Can you see that? So it's actually sharpening the noise. If I bring this masking slider up, you see how it starts to take it away from these otherwise smooth areas, but the wing is still looking sharp? Okay, so that's what that masking slider does. I'm just going to bring this back down to something reasonable, like so. Okay, I don't need to transform. And the only optics that I'm going to do, again, this is the only time you will see the chromatic aberration, and this one for defringe. Okay, so that means if there's a color outline around something, you just have to check these off, but it's only available in this develop raw tool. Okay, now once I apply this tool, and I do so just by clicking it, okay, you'll notice now it says develop, not develop raw. So if I open it again, okay, and I go back down to optics, okay, see now I only have defringe. I don't have chromatic aberration and the optics, the other distortion one. Sorry, those are the two, okay? So you lose some of those settings that are only available on raw. So Dave says, how do I do the clipping? So how do I get it to show, Dave? You can get it to show just by either clicking these little circles up here on the histogram. See now it's showing the clipping warnings on the blacks, or J on the keyboard. if I want to fix it, as in not having those areas clipping, I need to adjust either the highlights or the shadows so that it's not clipping. Okay? And I was doing that using the sliders in Develop Raw. Okay, so let's take a look at the before and after. Okay, so far I've just sort of punched up the contrast a little bit. Okay. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to add a little bit of an edge vignette, and the vignette in Luminar is really great. So what I'm going to do is drag it all the way down, and you'll notice that it's kind of off-centered, right? Because we cropped the image. So this is something that Skylum knows about. It's been reported. And hopefully they will be adding what's called a post-crop vignette, so that after you've cropped your image, it starts in the middle of where you're at now, not the original image, right? So what I do is, this is my little vignette trick, is take the amount down to -100 and the feather down to -100. Then you can see where the vignette is. Then I make it the size that I want, and I might make it a little bit more rounder. Okay, so you can make it round if you want. I'm going to keep it oval. And then with this choose subject, this is something you can't do in Lightroom. You'd have to do this with a radial mask in Lightroom. Okay, so I'm just going to position it so that it's masking and darkening everything except the butterfly and around. Now that I've got it where I want it, now I turn the feather back up so it's a soft gradation. So the feather amount is how harsh the edge is. And then bring the amount or the darkening level down to something a little bit more realistic. Okay, so something you don't want to do with your vignettes is this. Okay, you don't want to be able to see where it is and see the shape of it, because if you've done that, it's too obvious. When you have somebody look at your images, you want them to say, wow, that's a great image. You don't want them to say, nice vignette, right? Not so good. Okay, Rob, let me see. All right, so we still have some more questions about clipping, right? So clipping is just an indicator, Heather. It's an indicator of which pixels are in your image that are either overly bright, meaning there's no detail in the white areas, or overly dark, no detail in the shadow areas. Right? Actually, Rob, if you want to share, there's an article on why my snow is gray on our website that I talk about the histogram and clippings in great detail. So if you could share a link to that, that would be helpful as well. Edward, does the masking slider select what not to denoise? No, it's only applying on the sharpening, Edward, only on sharpening. All right. As Rob is indicating in the chat, please give this video a thumbs up if you are enjoying it so far. And remember to subscribe and also hit the notification button, because then you'll get notice of when I post new videos. I probably have another one coming out later this week with my little upside down trick that I briefly showed you, and just talking about that in a little more detail. And anytime that I'm live, you'll get notices as well. Is that helpful, Heather? Yes? Cool. Okay. So now I've got the vignette. The next thing I want to do is to add some blur to the background. Okay, now there's Portrait Bokeh AI, which will blur the background, but you'll notice that if we open the Portrait Bokeh AI, currently doesn't recognize the butterfly as a portrait. That again is something that Skylum has been requested, and hopefully they'll add animals as a means to blur the background, that will select an animal, because animals can have a portrait too, right? So for now, there's a workaround that I can show you to do that. Okay, I'm going to use the Structure AI tool, and I'm going to take it to negative, which is adding blur. I'm going to boost it all the way, and I always take my sliders to extremes before I do any masking so that I can see what it's doing really obviously. Then I can bring it back, just like I did with the vignette. Okay, so I go to extreme on purpose. Okay, and then bring it back. Okay. With this latest version, actually it was 2 updates ago, I think it was 1.0.6, we now have new masking tools. Okay, so in the masking tools now, it used to be up here on this bar was like a little pen icon or something, and we only had the brush. Now when you click on it, there's masking, so there's adjustment and masking like tabs. Right, now we have brush, linear gradient, radial gradient, and mask AI. Now I tried the Mask AI on this one, and I'm going to run it again. You get this little sort of animation as it's analyzing your image, and it didn't find the butterfly as the subject. Okay, there's 9 different elements that Luminar can look for. Okay, so in here it thinks it's found sky, flora, architecture, water, mountains, and natural ground. The other ones that are not currently showing are human, man-made ground, and transport. Okay, so transport like cars and things like that. Okay, and funny enough, this one actually, when I clicked on architecture, it kind of found the butterfly. Right, so I think with architecture it's looking for things with detail that might look like bricks, and it sort of found the butterfly. So there isn't one that's called butterfly, and if you sort of click on each of them, you'll notice that with flora it's kind of, hit and miss. So I'm going to start with this one here, just set to architecture. And then when I go back to the mask, all the tools, I can open this panel at the bottom, okay, for more actions to show the mask. And then I'm just going to add to it with the brush. Okay, so you can erase from it or paint to add. Okay, so I'm going to use a soft brush, fairly soft brush, and make it a little bit smaller and a little bit softer and a little bit less strength. Okay, so strength is if I take one brush stroke and paint it on, it's like a big glob. Imagine you're painting a fence. Okay, you don't dip your brush in the paint and paint a big glob. You wipe off your brush and you do coats, right? So it's kind of like adding it one, like layering your painting. Okay, so I'm just going to paint in a little bit here. Remember this is the blurring one, right? So I'm actually painting in sort of opposite of what I actually want, but that's okay because it started me off with the butterfly. So I'm just going to go with it. And I'm just sort of painting in. I'll paint with a little bit more opacity here. So I'm just sort of painting in. And if you want to get a bigger brush, you can use the size slider or again, keyboard shortcuts. Okay, so I'm using the square bracket keys to make the brush bigger or smaller. And that's on my keyboard shortcuts PDF. Okay, so you can print that out and have that handy for yourself. Okay, so I'm just sharpening or I'm blurring right now the things that are going to be opposite. So right now I want to sharpen these areas. Okay, so when I go back here and I turn the mask off, you can see that what's happening is the butterfly is getting blurred. I'm just going to make sure I've got all of him painted in. Okay, so I want him to be blurred. Right now he's blurred, okay? But we're just going to invert, okay? So now I've inverted it, which is the opposite. So the opposite of everything I just painted. And you can see that I kind of didn't paint very well. So I'm just going to lower the softness and the size of my brush. Because when you're painting with a soft brush, I sort of overpainted the butterfly and I got the background too. So I'm just going to go back in. And what I would do normally is I would actually come in here and do a much better job of this. I would zoom in and, do each of his legs like this. Okay. So let me just do that. Make sure I get his little antenna. Okay. To zoom in, right, I can hold my space bar and click. And then if I want to move around the image, just hold the space bar and then you can move around the image. So now I can get a more sort of smaller brush and really get his legs and make sure I'm not blurring his legs. Okay, like so. Nobody likes blurry legs. Right, now that I've done that, you can see the before by pressing the eye, the toggle, the eyeball. Okay. Where's Sheila tonight, Rob? Sheila loves the eyeball. But see how that's blurring the background? Okay. Now, the cool part is that I can actually, now that I've got this mask how I want it, copy it. So I copied the mask, okay, just by clicking this button here. Then when I close structure, I'm going to open it a second time, but this time I'm going to add structure. I'm going to go to the mask, paste in the mask that I just did. So again, it's it's now sharpening the background. But guess what I'm going to do next? Invert. So I use the same mask again. So I'm now sharpening the butterfly. Okay, so see what this is doing? It's adding structure. And there's some perfect stuff happening over there because my painting is not perfect. I'm just going to lower that again a little bit. Okay, see how that's adding some structure? Okay. Then I'm going to take it one more step farther with the blurring of the background. And I'm going to go use the glow tool in soft focus. Okay. Actually, let's try this one. So these are all ones that will add sort of a glowing effect, right? And I'm actually going to cool it off a little bit. See how I'm now affecting the tone of the image? So I'm actually going to cool the background off a little bit. And once again, go in here and paste that mask, right? And invert it, okay? So now once again, I'm blurring the background even more, okay? Can you see that? And it cooled it off, so it actually took away some of that orange, okay? Now let's say I want a little bit less color in the background. I can do the same with the color tool, right? I can lower saturation. Now that looks better in the background, but again, I want to keep it on the butterfly. So mask. And this is the number one reason why I was so excited about having this copy and paste, right? Because this is what saves me so much time. So now I've just pasted it again, and the adjustments are only applying to the background. Okay, so now you can see that I can soften the color. I can also go into the HSL sliders and do things like darken the magenta. Okay, I don't want to do that. That's no good. I'm just going to try. I'm just going to try the different colors here. I'm going to darken that one a little bit. Let's try red. See that orange up there? So that's getting the red and the orange. Okay. Maybe even green. So I can darken the greens, the yellows. So I'm darkening the background now as well. Okay. Let's take a look at it before. Okay, so that's the original image and after. Look at how much the butterfly comes out now. And then the final thing that I did was I added the bokeh layer. Okay, so bokeh is a thing that I created. So I think I used the, which one? I think I used the purple. This one. I used the pink one. Okay, so I have a bunch of different bokehs that I've created as overlays. And I wanted to position it. So it comes in at 50% opacity. If I dial it up to 100%, you just get that layer, okay? And it's not seeing through to the bottom layer. So inside the Luminar Neo course, I actually have 3 lessons on layers, and I teach you about the opacity of the layer, the different blend modes. And I just want to get this one so that the bokeh is positioned sort of around the butterfly. I kind of like that one, and it's not on him. But of course, I can mask him as well, okay? Then I want to change the blend mode and see which one works best with this image. Okay, so I'm going through, usually lighten and screen works well on bokeh. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Or overlay or soft light. Okay, so that one is actually darkening the image. So I could actually use this one if I want to just make a really subtle effect. But I kind of liked what was happening with one of these ones here. Okay, so let's look at that. So screen, that's pretty cool. Okay, now let's say I decide I'm going to leave it up high for a moment. Okay, we can mask it as well. Now I don't know, there isn't a copy and paste here yet, and I don't know if it's because it doesn't translate from one layer to the other. Right, so I'm just going to use a radial gradient and just sort of remove it off of our butterfly here. Okay, so I want to make sure that he's not getting the bokeh over top of him. Okay. Yeah, see, there's no copy and paste on layers. Okay, so they're still working on adding more features. The masking tools were just added in here. So one thing at a time. But let's say I want to shift the color of this because it's more orange than pink and I want it to match the flowers, I can use the color tool, right? And go into the hue slider, which is tint. And I can make the oranges I'm more pink. Let's go this way. Make the reds more pink. There we go. We're getting closer. Okay. I can also just do an entire hue shift, which is affecting the entire image. Okay. Now keep in mind, this is only affecting the bokeh, not the image below. Okay. That looks more pink, right? Now let me just turn the saturation down a tiny little bit. So it's not affecting the butterfly in any way, just the layer that I'm on, which is the bokeh. So now I've made it more pink. I'm just going to dial it down a little bit. Right? So there is my final image. Right? So I've taken it from something that looked like that to that. So what do you think? Furry legs. Okay, let's see. Do we have any questions, Rob? Have I Miss Edward has a question. Okay, where is Edward's question? If you could actually paste them in for me because I've lost all the comments, Rob. I've lost all the comments. I don't see them anymore. So if you could actually find Edward's comment for me and put it in our private chat. Something happened when I moved. Edward's question. I guess my question is, does the masking slider, what does it select in sharpening? So it's looking for when I'm sliding that masking slider, it's looking for large, smooth areas. Okay. So if you had a person, that would be skin. So it's not going to sharpen the skin. That's a good thing, right? So the higher the mask, the less it will sharpen the skin. Same with sky. Okay. So you don't want to sharpen your sky because that's often where your noise lives as well. Did I miss any other questions or comments? Something happened. I lost all the comments. Oh, there they are. They're back. Okay. Furry legs. I missed something about furry legs. Thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, and that's why I said I want to talk about why I'm editing it that way. Okay. Awesome. Thank you, Gregory. Yes, copy and paste mask is new. That came out with version 1.0.6. And I did do an update video on that as well. And if you didn't get my email, if you already have the Luminar Neo course, we just added a new lesson on masking this week. It's actually part of lesson 3. So Edward, if you missed my email, I sent that out to everybody that has the course already. Then go back to lesson 3 if you've already watched that. And there's a second video on the page now on the masking tools. So all those things that I just showed you, the radial mask, the gradient mask, and the masking AI, I did a whole video on that inside of the course, right? So for those of you that come from Phil Steele's email, and you have questions about the course, please put those in the chat as well. I'd be happy to answer those. And maybe even our other students who are watching can answer those for you. But yes, the one big question that we get a lot, and I added that into the introduction page as well, is that the course will always be updated. Okay, so we added the new masking lesson. Once the new background replacement AI comes in, that's one of the next major things that they've said is coming. Then I will be doing a lesson on that as well. I waited a little bit on the masking because it wasn't sort of great when it first came out, and I was hoping that it was improved with the next update, which it was, and it was added to layers. So that's kind of why I waited on that one. I wanted to make sure that it was a stable update. Yay, new lessons. Something for you to watch, Vicky. Here's a heart question, Dave said. When does your raw image no longer be an image, but rather image art, sky replacement, etc.? Well, that's a whole can of worms, Dave. Actually, I think what I might do is, because we've got a lot of new students in the Luminar Neo course, and actually share a link to our main DPM Facebook group as well, please, Rob, because these are the places like where we can have that kind of philosophical discussion about, what is art, right? Is photography art? I had a discussion with this on that very topic with somebody that I know who's a photographer the other day who was insisting that photography is not art. It's a digital, or they want to call it now the stuff that's composite images, digital art. Okay. But if you go back to this is my opinion, okay, solely my opinion. If you go back to the original definition of photography, it comes from Greek words, photo meaning light and graphy meaning drawing. So photography is literally drawing with light. It doesn't say anything about a camera or Photoshop or anything. So how you make drawings with light is totally up to you, right? It could be a photograph, it could be with film, it could be with digital, it could be totally created in the computer. Is that a photograph? Okay, so that's up for each of us to decide. But that's a whole can of worms that I don't want to open today, Dave. But I would love to have that discussion in our group. Which part, Petra? Where can you find the tape? The tape. Which tape? Yeah, let me know a little bit more. Oh, of today's class. You mean this one that is happening right now? It will be available on the YouTube channel right after the live. So we're currently still live, and I will be for another little while. I'm going to do a few more images, and then it will be on our YouTube channel right afterwards. Right? Okay. All right. So I'm going to continue and do another image. So this is another image that was submitted by the same fellow, Kai Vu, and I think this is another one I may do some nice bokeh. So see how there's already some bokeh in the background. I'm not going to demonstrate this one today. I'm going to save it for potentially another week. But I think this is another one that would work well with a bokeh overlay. Okay. I want to show this one. This is one of Nancy's images, and she's one of our students as well. And it's a JPEG. So you'll notice right off the top that you don't have develop raw available. But I want to show this one because it's architecture, and people ask this about Luminar Neo as well. And can you correct, the building distortion when you're shooting up with a wide angle? If you've used Luminar AI, those tools were in the crop tool. Okay, they're not there now, but I'll show you where you can find them. So I'm going to try straighten horizon, and it did a pretty good job. When I'm straightening something like this, I'm looking at this part in the middle of the church. And when you click outside the cropping box, you see the grid that shows up, and I'm just going to go until I see it lined up with this part of the middle of the window. So always use stuff that's in the middle to line up in terms of verticals. Okay, I'm just going to move it over this way so I get most of these windows and hit enter. To find the optics tools, we were in there before. Okay, so optics, this is where you'll find the chromatic aberration, right, which we don't have on this one because it's not raw, but I have defringe. Okay. And I also have transform down here, which is where you'll be able to do things like correct the distortion. Okay, so vertical is when you are looking up or down and you get the building doing this tilt. Okay, so when I go to the negative, see it's pulling the top of the image and sort of spreading it out and making it look like it's not as converging. Okay, if I go the other way, it stretches the image side to side. Okay, not what we want to do. I haven't still figured out, what this does. It sort of stretches your image. I'm not sure when I would ever use that, to be honest, but it's there, right? So I'm going to do some basic adjustments while I'm here. And if I turn on the clipping warnings, right, now you can see that there's lots of the windows that just turned red. Do you see that? So if I hit J, see how the windows are white? Now they're red, right? Same thing if I click here on the clipping warnings up here. So I'm going to dial highlights down until I get rid of most of those red marks. See that? In fact, I'm going to go about like so. Okay. Now I'm going to go in here. So I don't have any black clipping. I am going to go on the curves. I have an entire video in the lesson where I talk about curves in the course. And there's also a free video on our YouTube channel where I talk about the curves tool as well. So if you could please share that one, Rob. Okay. All right, so now I do have a little bit of black clipping. Right, so remember, black clipping will enhance the color and give me more color. Okay, so I'm going to bring these highlights down a fair bit even more. Okay, so far I'm just correcting distortion and trying to pull some highlights. Okay, if I want more detail inside the church, I'm just going to increase the exposure while still keeping these highlights. Okay, closing the develop tool. The next one I'm going to use on this one is Enhance AI and the accent slider. Okay, so this one does a really good job of like turning the lights on, as it were. Okay, so see how that's increasing the enhancement? Now look at the color saturation in the windows here. Okay, so before and after, and I've lost a little bit of detail here, partly because this is a JPEG, so I'd get more detail out of a raw file for sure. Okay. Once I close that, let's say I want to go back and tweak the develop tool a little bit. Okay, that's where your edit panel comes in. And this is now your history. Okay, so your develop tool, or the what I just did previously, is here. Okay, so I'm actually going to remove the brighten exposure that I did before. Now notice when I went back to develop, it turned off the enhance. Okay, so you kind of have to estimate and then come back to the top and turn it back on. Okay. So the only other thing I might do with an image like this is just do an edge vignette again to keep the eye into the center. And it is a little bit off color. Okay. So I could go back to develop and go back to the original develop, but remember it turns off any tool that's above it. Okay. So I'm trying to correct the color. I can just do another version of develop, which is another advantage of Luminar Neo over AI. You can add the tools multiple times, and it's something that I cover inside the Luminar Neo course of using the develop tool as a dodge and burn. Actually, I have a video on that on our YouTube channel as well, how to do dodge and burn without the dodge and burn tool. So it's a little hack that I created, or sort of invented. I'll take credit. Anyways, I'm sure other people have figured it out as well. Okay. So it's a little thing that I figured out how to, it's a workaround, right? And I actually prefer doing it that way as opposed to using a dodge and burn tool. So I'm in here and I'm just taking away some of the yellow because I'm looking at, yes, there's some gold in here, but it's a little bit too gold. Okay. So I'm dialing down that towards more blue. And now you see the windows are picking up a lot more blue. Could check my clipping, right? We're still good on the clipping. Now notice I'm not getting any blacks clipping again. So I might add more black. Maybe I'll use curves. Okay. So I want to always make sure I have a little bit of black clipping to keep those colors. That's better. See how orange it was? And that's probably just because of the indoor lighting. There's another little color trick. If you find that you're in a situation like this one, especially where, let's say the lights inside, like these here, are incandescent or tungsten lights, which are very orange. So you're getting this really golden sort of light down here. And then the daylight coming through the windows is very blue, right? So you get this weird sort of mix of colors. In the color tool, there's this remove color cast slider. And I find that it does a really good job, especially when you have situations like this that are sort of mixed lighting, right? So see what happens when I drag it up. It's doing a good job of maintaining the color everywhere and getting rid of that weird yellow cast down here, okay? So that's about all I would probably do with an image like this. I just wanted to show you those correction tools, and I might apply my favorite, which is Mystical, because I want to give it sort of that nice softness and glow of this ethereal feeling of inside of this cathedral or church. Right? Let's look at the before. Okay, so we had some tilting, corrected. And here's the thing, right? So correcting your distortions on buildings like this is completely subjective, right? So I did it to demonstrate it, but in all honesty, I actually prefer the image the way it was. So I'm actually going to undo that and put it back. So I went back to the develop tool at the very bottom and undid it and the optics, right? Transform. Then when I go back to the top edit, which I just did mystical, it will apply everything again. Okay. So now I'm not correcting the distortion at the top, just the color. Okay. I actually prefer it because I can see more of the tops of the windows and I don't mind it. If you're an architectural photographer and you're trying to capture things accurately for the architect or something, then by all means you need to correct it. Okay. Richard asks, do I have a preference between RAW versus JPEG? Yeah, always shoot RAW if you can, Richard, because part of the reason, like you'll notice that when I went in here in the first one, this is a JPEG, right? When I go to the color tools under white balance, you don't have any of the options, okay? So you only have as shot. And let me just turn your question off here. When I go into a RAW file, let's see, is this one raw? Because I wanted to do this one. When I go into a raw file, we see that the develop raw tool is active. And when I go to color under white balance, I have all the same white balance presets that I have with my camera. But the other advantage is that your raw file carries a lot more data. So it carries 2 stops of data on either side of your exposure. So especially in a situation like this where it's high contrast, and the same with the church, remember how the windows were starting to get a little bit muddy? If it was a raw file, I'd be able to pull more detail out of there successfully, right? So if you have a link to that article, please, Rob, of shooting JPEG, of why to shoot raw, and share that for Richard, that would be great. You do shoot raw now. Okay. So when you're processing then, Richard, the difference in how you process, the process is the same. Whether you're using Neo or Lightroom or what have you, it's exactly the same steps. You just have more latitude with a raw file. That's all. Okay. Can you save the raw image as a copy to go back to it? Yes, I think I know where you're going with that, Dave. If you're using a program like Lightroom, for example, you can actually make what's called a virtual copy that currently doesn't exist with Luminar Neo. It's not something you can do. So if you want to process the image in different ways, for example, you can save a duplicate, but if you just want to go back to it, you can go back to your raw files at any time. Okay, so this one of the butterfly, for example, actually I'll show you one from the course. So if you purchase the Luminar Neo course from me, these are all images that you get. These are my raw images that you get to work with inside the course. Okay, and I've demonstrated how I've done these editing things in each of the lessons. Okay, so this is a raw image, for example. So when I open it, all of the edits that I've ever done to it inside of Luminar are all here under this edit panel. Okay, so I can go back to any of these steps and undo them or edit them. So this is what's called non-destructive editing because it's a database type of program. So Luminar Neo is saving the edits in a database, and it's basically like a recipe. So the analogy that I like to use is if you're going to cook supper, your cookbook is on the shelf, right? With the recipe of how you want to cook supper. Let's say you're going to make lasagna, okay? I don't know why that popped into my head, okay? If you're going to cook lasagna, you've got the recipe that tells you the ingredients and the steps that you need to take to make lasagna. But the noodles and the stuff are not in the recipe book, right? They're in the fridge, they're in the pantry. So in order to cook that thing, you have to go get the ingredients. So the analogy here is like that. So your raw file is your ingredients. It is saved on your hard drive somewhere, okay? The recipe is saved inside of Luminar, okay? They're not together. They're separate. So Luminar keeps it in the database. The only time that you will then, when you're prepared to cook your image, you then need to go and export it, okay? So this is when you would export it to disk, for example, and save the exported or cooked version with the edits that you've currently you're currently seeing on your screen, okay? So for example, let me just add a folder here. I'm not sure if I have this in here. I'm going to add a folder of my edits here. And I'm just showing you how to quickly add some images to Luminar Neo so I can import this entire folder. And these are all images that I have saved or exported from Luminar. Okay, so you can see this folder here called exports, okay? And if I scroll down, you can see that I've got multiple versions, for example, of this one, of the street scene in Paris. Okay, so every time I changed the quote recipe, I did something different to the image, I saved a different version. Okay. Likewise, this image here, right? So we use layers. I use the layer to add the balloon. Okay, so different versions, right? So you don't have to necessarily save another raw file. You just make your new edits and save another new exported JPEG, okay? After you edit, can you go back to it? Awesome. Yes, you purchased the course. Good, excellent. Thanks for that, Dave. So your catalog is a virtual image. In a sense, yes. So I like to call it my recipe book, right? So your catalog is your recipe book. If I wanted to completely process them differently, right, then you can actually duplicate the raw file and have, say, one processed in color and one in black and white, right? But the thing with these edits is you could turn any of them off, okay? So if I go back to I'll just use this one, for example. I have no idea what I've done to this image, but I know that I've done something, right? I can go back to any of these and just turn them off, right? I can just dial it to 0 or just undo, right? So I'm not even sure what this one is doing here, waiting for it to load. So most of the time, I don't make another actual copy of my raw file. I just go edit it differently, okay? Brandon has a question. Okay. Actually, Neo has sky, flora, architecture, water, natural ground, man-made ground. If there's a lasso feature, you can outline an object to create your mask. Yes, it currently doesn't have a lasso feature, Brandon. You just have to use the radial tool, and there isn't one that finds the edges. Like if you're using Photoshop, right, it's got a find subject, or if you're using Lightroom, it has a find subject, right? This is the very first version of the Mask AI in Luminar, so it's only going to get better from here, and I anticipate being able to refine it a lot more. Okay, so this is just the first iteration, and I'm sure that they're going to have changes and improvements to it. Okay. All right. Fun fact, took an hour to get that photo. It was raining too. Plus we were hiding from the rain. Usually we'll sit at a cafe or something. I am the one that does the French pastries, right? So I will eat the French pastries, Lee, and Rob will usually be finding a coffee, depending on the time of day, or a glass of wine or a beer, right? Aha, see, there you go. Yes, I had chocolate, probably a chocolate croissant, and he had a beer. Okay, so Rob is not a photographer, but he's very patient. So I'm lucky in that sense that he's patient to wait for me. All right, so let's do this one of Marty's because it's a great example actually of this high contrast and the raw image and how much data that we have here, okay? So if we go into the raw develop tool and turn on the clipping warning, so J, you'll see that the brightest areas are clipping, meaning there's no detail there. So if you printed this, it would not show any detail in this area, okay? So we want to make sure that's not the case. And I've been in caves like this, and they usually have these bright lights, and that's why you end up, getting this kind of thing. So I'm going to bring the highlights down and maybe the whole exposure, okay? So now it's looking really dark, but this is probably more what the cave looked like, right? So the image is a little bit overexposed, but again, I'm pulling the exposure down 1 2/3 stops. And if this was a JPEG, there would be still no detail here. It would just be a blob of mud. Okay, so I'm going to do kind of a balance between exposure down and highlights down. And then I'm also going to lift the shadows a little bit so you can see what that's doing. One thing you want to be careful of is doing this, okay? So this is what's called, there isn't any color in here, but what I would call this, you guys, right? This would be neon puke if there was color. So that's kind of one of my terms, because if this was different colors outside, when you bring your highlights and your shadows down or to such a degrees of extreme like this, you've got no difference between the darkest area and the brightest area, and it's false. So when your mind looks at that, it doesn't get it, right? It doesn't make any sense. So I can bring the contrast down a little bit, right? And I may tend to do this one actually on the curve as opposed to with these sliders. So you can adjust any of these things here on the slider or on the curves. Let me show you curves. Okay, so if I want to, and I'm just double clicking to reset. Okay, so if I want to darken the whole image, you just grab the line on the curve and pull it down. Right, up here is highlights. Okay, so your highlights are up here. Darkening. Okay, darken and lighten the shadows. Okay, so I'm going to pull this down a little bit more. Now the whole thing has to come down, so I'm going to go a little more. So see how we're getting close to what I just had up there? Right. Oops. I kind of like the result I had better with these sliders. So you can usually do it either or and get really close to what you're looking for, like so. Okay. Let's go a little darker and just boost the shadows a little. Okay, so clipping warnings. I still have a little bit of clipping there. We'll take that down. And that looks pretty good. Okay, I am going to make sure that I have a little bit more black clipping. Okay, and now look at the reflection. Okay, let's look at the difference. You see how the reflection comes out more too? But your eye is going to go here more. Okay. Do we want to crop this image? I don't want to lose the reflection, but this thing over here on the right kind of bugs me, and it's really busy over here. Okay, so if we look at this upside down, so I can just rotate it, right? Where does your eye go? Your eye definitely goes to the areas of brightness, contrast, and that's all of this whole area. Okay, so what I might do is just trying to minimize this area, and I'll show you my little dodge and burn hack, okay? So let's see what the program thinks is a good crop. It only came in a little bit, so I tend to agree with that. I want to leave the bottom. I tend to agree with that, actually. It's a pretty good crop. I want to make sure I've got the whole puddle on this side. Okay. Now, how are we with the color of this? It looks really yellow. Okay, so I could go back to Develop Raw, or I can go to this color tool and see what Remove Color Cast does. See how that does a really good job of just getting out that weird shift? Look at that. I kind of like that. Okay. I might decide this one is black and white because it's really about texture, isn't it? Okay. We can darken some of the yellows if we want, and that actually helps bring us some more detail. Okay. Let's see if there's any orange. Yeah, there's definitely orange. Okay. So see how I can adjust the different tones. I use the HSL tools a lot. Okay. And I'm also going to add a vignette. So darken all the way, feather to 0, pick the size. Now what I'm going to do might trick you here because I'm actually going to put the subject more like this. So I want to darken the top half of this image, and I want to keep the reflection nice and light. So I'm going to lighten inside the circle and darken outside. And then, of course, adjust my feather and the amount. Okay, so see what this vignette is doing? See how it's darkening the top more than the bottom, and I'm still seeing this reflection. So see how I can go a little more extreme. So I'm keeping the reflection. Oops, I closed it. I'm keeping the reflection without darkening it. Okay, so see how we've gone from overexposed, really contrasty, and toned that down just with a simple vignette. Okay. This one over here is really bright as well. So there's another tool that you can use to tone down highlights, and that's the super contrast. Right? So super contrast allows you to add contrast to highlights, midtones, or shadows. Okay, so I'm actually going to dial this to the right because it's darkening the highlights. Okay, and then just go a little bit. And I only want this to apply on various points here. So I want to get these parts in the background, but see how it's actually adding some color. So now I'm changing my mind and I don't like it. So I'm going to undo, and I just have to go and delete it from here. And I'm going to use my dodge and burn hack. Okay, so if you haven't watched that video yet, you just open the develop tool a second time. Now I'm going to darken and bring those highlights way down. And I'm just looking at the parts that I want to apply it to. And then I'm going to paint it in. Okay, so using the mask. Oh, I lost Neo. Okay, that's unfortunate. I got video software running and I'm trying to stream. So let me just open that up again. There we go. All right. So I've lost my Neo and I lost my edits. Okay, so this is something that people have complained about with Luminar Neo, and honestly, I honestly haven't had a crash myself, and I generally don't have a crash, and I think it's partly due to the fact that I am really pushing my computer's limits here. So I'm just gonna go back to what I had, or what I think I had here, something like that. And I might suggest a little bit less yellow in here. That looks good. So notice I changed the camera profile this time. A little bit less color shift. And I'll come back to the vignette in a minute because I want to show you this tool, this trick here. Okay, so lower the exposure and lower the highlights. And then I'm just going to mask and brush it in. So I'm going to paint with a lower opacity. And let's use this smaller brush. And I just want to get these things that are overly bright sort of in the background here. Okay. See how it's only applying where I'm painting it. Okay, so if I turn that on and off. Now, if I want to lighten certain areas, okay, I'm going to darken this area a little bit more too. Okay. Still overly bright. Like that. If I want to darken certain areas, then I just have to close the develop tool. Okay, darken too much here. Sorry, if I want to lighten, like in the reflection, I just have to close it and apply it again. Okay. So see how we've really brought that into line here. And I think this one actually would make a really nice black and white. So I'm going to convert this one to black and white. And the black and white tool is the best way to do that because you've got more control over how the tones come out in your image. So there's not a lot of tones here other than yellow. So I don't think we're going to really get much here. But I do find that after applying this tool, the black and white tool, I want to go back and look at develop again and make sure that I've got nice white and nice black. Okay, so I want to bring the whites up until it's just touching the edge of the graph or just clipping, and give it a little more black and maybe a little more contrast. Okay, so what that's doing is really punching the black and white up. See that? So let's look at the full before. Overexposed, kind of weird color because it's inside a cave. I don't know about you, but it looks like some sort of monster to me now. It looks like a blob monster. Jabba the Hutt. All right. Who here has watched the hack video? We did. Like it better than the old dodge and burn. See, that's what I said. Thank you for that. How do you get the mask to stay on? You just have to go. I'll show you. So if you are masking, and as soon as you apply a mask, oh, I am not having good luck today. I am not having good luck today. So I've got too many other things open here, I think. Just give me a second. Let me close that. Let me close that. I honestly haven't had a crash. Sad layer cake. It was a sad layer cake. And I lost my edits again. Okay. Apparently it doesn't like your image, Marty, but I'm just going to do something here to show what happens when I'm masking. Okay. I could have added some structure, which would have been nice as well. So if I'm masking this and I use a radial gradient, for example, okay, as soon as you apply it, it's going to show you the mask. When you go back to adjustments, it's like it's disappeared, right? But if you go down here and go to the mask actions, there's a show button, or once you're in here, you can press it used to be that you could press the / key and show it, but it doesn't work anymore. I'm hoping that's something they bring back. But this show button here under mask actions is what does the trick. Okay. All right. It is crashing to a beautiful photo. I'm looking for a question. Curves versus developed sliders. Okay, let me find your question here. Oz guy. There we go. Okay. Brad. All right. Never been confident using curves. I always use the slider. Is there an advantage or disadvantage to the slider over curves? There is and there isn't. There's one that I use in the lessons in the video for the course, and that's this image here of this one of Hawaii. And I did use the curves on this one. The difference is that you have a little bit more control of where your contrast is going, right? So with the highlight slider, it's affecting a predetermined part of your image, part of the histogram, right? That's just below whites. With the shadows, it's affecting a predetermined set. Whereas with the curve, okay, if I go all the way back here, let me just see if I used curves on this one. Okay, so this is my original image. Okay, so you can see that I used a combination of curves and the sliders here, right? If I go back to the full before image, okay, so you can see that I've added a little bit of smart contrast. I've brought the highlights down, okay? I think I did curves again somewhere else. Okay, so I did develop again here. Let me see what I've done. Hard to remember what I've done on all of these steps here. So I used a combination, right, is the answer. Let me just undo this one and I'll go back to the original image. So if you want to get back to all edits undone, just go back to the catalog, right click, adjustments. There's also a keyboard shortcut, Shift Command R, and it goes back to the original. So basically it just erases your edits, right? Now where to go? I've got gremlins today. Let me see. Let me just try another image here. There we go. Yeah, I think I'm having some bad luck with Luminar Neo today, of course. How do you save your interim changes on your raw file before you prevent as a crash? That's a great question. I've never had to, and I've never lost an edit either. So I've never experienced a crash where I've lost the edits. You're seeing a first time. Okay? So you shouldn't have to. They should just be there, right? Like this is an image that I edited a long time ago, and my edits are still there, right? Let me revert this one again. Okay, so it's probably just taking a moment to revert. There we go. All right, now we're back. Okay, so now we're back to the original image. This is what it looked like out of the camera. And you can see that if I turn the clipping warnings on, the sky is completely blown out. And this whole area is really dark, right? So I used the curves. Let me just see if I have a good... Okay, we'll start with camera landscape. Maybe I'll go... This is an old Canon file, I think. So it's not the best. I think it's a CR2, right? So here's my curves versus the sliders, right? So if I do highlights, I can get some of that back in the sky, okay? I also find that these sliders are limited in terms of how far it goes, right? So if I do that, you see I'm starting to pick up some detail here, but I can go farther with it on the curve, right? So I can go to more extremes. So that's number one, right? Number two, I want to add contrast in the midtones, right? So if I just do smart contrast, it stretches the histogram out and it's pushing everything evenly, right? Versus if I want contrast in the middle of my image or down here, I can say, well, I want this increased and this decreased, but I want to keep this part of the curve neutral. Okay, so now I'm adding contrast in the lower portion of my graph, but not the upper. Okay, can you see that? So I've added contrast in the shadow areas. If I turn this on and off, so see how it's added contrast in the shadow areas, but not up here. Okay, I can then use this to lift the shadows. Let's go further. Okay. So they work really well together, but I can't do something like that. The other reason for using curves is you can do things like adjusting contrast on color. So similar to this super contrast where I can adjust contrast based on highlight, midtone, shadow, now I can adjust contrast based on red, green, blue. Okay, so on the green slider, pardon me, on the green curve, I can adjust if I want the highlights of the green, but I want to keep my shadows more magenta. Right? See that? And then you can start to do things like cross processing, right? So this is how you make images that look like this. Okay, so you can start to do stuff like that, right? And these are a lot of the times, if you're applying a LUT or a look, you can get this kind of look with that. But if you want to play around and make custom ones, try the curves and different colors adjustments on the different channels. Does that help answer your question, Brad? Let's see. Would it be correct to say that clipping area shows areas that are too bright or too dark? Yes. Yes, it does. That is correct. And specifically with no detail. Okay. So too bright or too dark is subjective. What it's showing you is where there's detail or not. So if I turn the clipping warnings on here, right, you can see that I still have some areas in the sky that are still too bright. Okay. So even though it looks like they're on my graph, I'm still got a few places that are off the graph. Okay. We're not going to go quite so funky on the histogram. Okay. So on this one, I did a sky replacement because I didn't feel I could get the sky back. Okay. I hope that answers your question about curves. Okay. Let's go back to, I'm going to do one more image. Let's see. I wanted to do a portrait, okay? And Holly sent me this one a while ago. Are you still with us, Holly? So I wanted to do a portrait because the portrait tools inside of Luminar Neo are really great, okay? Did I miss anybody else's questions? I've got Brad's, who's the Aussie guy. I got Brad's. And did I miss anybody else's? Just let me know. Yes, Holly. She's still there. All right. So this one here, she's been doing some really great images and portraits, and Holly's one of my tutoring students as well. So I'm pretty sure this is her daughter. So I'm going to start with the develop raw and the camera profiles, and I'm going to start with portrait right out of the gate. And this is the camera profile. Okay, so portrait profiles usually give you more pink tones, and you could see that it did that indeed, right? Landscape, she looks a little green or yellow, so I'm going to go with either camera standard or camera portrait because that was actually pretty good. Let's go with camera standard. Okay, so camera standard is a little bit less red in the shadows. Her histogram, right, looks good. There's a little bit of clipping in the black, but I'm okay with that. Looks like her zipper is clipping, but that's fine. That's neither here nor there. I'm not worried about the zipper, right? So what I'm looking for in the raw is overall exposure. I'm going to bring the highlights maybe down just a tiny bit, but you don't want to go too far because this is a global edit. It's going to apply everywhere. You cannot mask the develop raw one. Okay, so if you want to use develop and mask it, you have to apply it and use it a second time. Okay. All right, so I'm going to bring that down just a little bit. And I'm going to check off chromatic aberration and defringe just because. Okay. Auto distortion, see how it changed the image a little bit? Like it will adjust for lens distortion in terms of wide versus long lens. And I don't think it's really necessary here. Okay. Do we need some sharpening? Looks like the eyes are a tiny bit sharp. I'm actually going to come back to that in a different tool. Okay, so I'm going to add some base sharpness here. Make sure the masking is high. And that's about it. Okay, so that's developed. The next thing I'm going to do is add a vignette and crop. Okay, so there's these little bits up at the top again. Remember, looking at it upside down. Where does your eye go? Okay, where does your eye go here? It definitely goes to her, but it also goes to these spots. Okay, so I know that when I'm looking at it right side up, I want to deal with those spots. So the easiest way is to just crop them out. Okay. Now the program suggested that crop. I am going to keep her arms. I don't want to crop in that much, but something like that just to get rid of those spots and give her a little bit of headspace. Okay. See how just that crop gets rid of those spots. Okay. Now I'm going to do a vignette. I'm just going to do a really simple edge vignette. I'm not even going to change my positioning or anything. I'm just going to come in or maybe a tiny bit here. I'm just going to adjust it so it's on her like that. Make sure it's subtle. And then I'm going to show you my custom trick, which I also did a video on that as well. There's a video on our YouTube channel on the portrait face light trick. So portrait AI face light trick. So I'm going to use the face light and also all of the tools under face AI. Okay, so face light literally lights the face as if you are lighting her with a flash or a reflector. So I'm going to do it just a tiny bit for now, and then I'm going to come back to it. She doesn't need to have her face slammed, but I want to show you this eye trick. Okay. Now I'm trying to look and see what her original eye color is. So I want to enhance the eyes and brighten them, but it's not really picking up a lot of color. So it looks like her eyes are maybe green or hazel. Let's try hazel. Okay. So when you change the color, look at the difference, what that did. So it's pretty similar to her original color, but look at how much more enhanced that is. And it's really bringing out this part of her iris. Okay. Now you'll also notice that she's got one eye that's a little bit squinty. So we're going to do a trick here. I'm going to show you. We're going to lighten the circles under her eyes a little bit. Okay. Eyebrows darkens the eyebrows. You can see that. Be careful with mouth because you don't want to do glowing teeth. So I always recommend applying something. Okay. So I like to do eye whitening, but not overboard as well. So I always recommend looking at it close up, but looking at it full as well, because when you go back and zoom out, anything that is glaringly obvious will be glaringly obvious. Okay. So keep your teeth whitening to a minimum. Just going to give her a little bit of darkening on the lips, like so. Okay, so I'm not going to do much more here. I am going to do face light to an extreme. Okay, so I'm bringing it all the way up to 70, and I'm going to show you why. Right, when I come back to develop, I'm going to apply develop again and lower the exposure overall, because look what happens. When I light her face, everything else got really bright. Everything else stayed the same. Okay, so now that I'm lowering the exposure, I'm lowering it until I get her face tone back to where I want it to, as normal. Okay, but what's happening is, see that? It's darkening everything else. So it's literally adding a vignette to everything except her face. Okay, I love this trick. Right, developed it myself. Let's call it the Darlene face trick, if you will. Right. Now I'm going to go in and do face AI again. And I'm just going to zoom in partially because I want to open this eye a little bit. So I'm going to do enlarge eyes and see if it will pick up that eye. Hopefully. Okay, so see how it's picking it up? It's opening both eyes, but I only want it on this one. So I'm going to mask using the radial gradient. Okay, it zoomed out on me. It won't let me zoom in. Okay, I'm just going to make a little one over her eye. Tricky because it's really small. Anyways, I just want to get this eye and not the other eye, so I don't have to be super critical, right? Did I get it? I'm still getting both. I'm going to use the brush. Okay, so I'm going to paint this one in. Aha. I need to clear it. There we go. So if you make a mistake like I did, I'm just clearing it. So nothing is being applied with this tool right now. Okay, then I'm going to go back in and just paint it over this eye. Okay, so I'm just applying it now to this eye. I should use less softness and make sure I get the edge right. There we go. So I just want that eye. So when I go back to adjustments now, if I zoom in, okay, we should see it just applying, like she's winking at us, to that one eye. Right? And that's the thing you cannot do as well with the older version of Luminar AI, because you can't apply this tool twice. Okay. All right. So that's the eye. Now I'm going to use the skin. I'm going to soften her skin. Let's see, does she have any shine? She does have a couple of blemishes down here. So let's use the defects removal and see how well it does. Did a really good job. Okay. And shine, usually shine looks for like on the bridge of the nose and the forehead if you've got some hot spots and things, if they've got like oily skin, right? But look at what a great job it does, right? And it's still, you can still see the textures of her skin, right? So it's done a really good job. It missed a couple of blemishes, so I'd probably go in and just pick those up with the erase tool, okay? The other thing I noticed is, remember I said her eyes look not quite so sharp as they could be, okay? So I'm going to use the details tool, and this is another little trick that I developed, right? I've got tons of nice little hacks and things for you inside the Luminar Neo course, tricks that I've just discovered, and I found that if you use the small details slider, right, first of all, it doesn't do very good things on skin at all. But of course, I just want it on the eyes, okay? So I'm just going to brush it over her eyes. So I'm just sharpening the eyes. I hope. Take a moment for it to catch up. Let's try the before and after. She's winking at us again. Okay, let's just see where we're at here. I'm going to give it a second to catch up. All right, let's see. Edmund says, get us a cloning and dodge and burn tool, please. Cloning, yes. But were you here earlier when I showed the dodge and burn hack? You honestly don't need a dodge and burn tool, to be honest. Sorry, but okay, the green cursor is the circle around my mouse. Yeah, so it's not something that you will see inside of Luminar Neo. This little green circle I just turn on for when I'm demonstrating, right? So you can see my cursor. Okay, so now I'm zoomed in here. Can you see what this details is doing? Okay, so that, look at her eyes, that's before. And it's sharpened this eye up in particular. Okay. Put my cursor back on. Right, can you see what that's doing? So the small detail slider does a really good job on things like this. And when you have like eyelashes or the details of the face that look sharp, the whole image will look sharp. If you have, topaz sharpen, by all means, use that. It's a great tool. But if you don't, this is a nice workaround. I'm actually going to add it to her eyebrow and see if we can make her eyebrow look sharper. It's kind of, you're tricking the eye to think the image is sharp. Okay. And when you have contrast, it will look sharper. I might even do just the edge of her lip as well. Okay. See that? Look at the difference. Can you see it actually looks sharper? Let's come into about here. Right? I might have gone too far on the eyes. You can actually see it now, but you can see the difference. We've opened her eyes up. We've got some softening skin, and using that details actually helps to make her eye look sharper. Okay. Okay. Awesome. As Rob is saying, yeah, it's been great to have all of you tonight. I'm just going to pop over here and remind you. Oh, I closed my other thing here. I'm just going to remind you of the Luminar Neo course is available. If you are one of Phil Steele's readers and you've come to us from Phil Steele's email that he sent out yesterday and you want to get the Luminar Neo course, make sure that you use the link in his email, okay, because that is just for you guys. Make sure you use that link. And if you want to submit your photos and join in next week, I'll be doing Lightroom. I'll actually be working with Daniel Korzanowski, who is my tour leader. We used to do tours together, and we're going to be demonstrating Lightroom, and we're going to edit each other's images. So that's kind of fun. And then the following week, I'll be back to Neo again. So I alternate between Lightroom and Neo. And sometimes when I'm demonstrating Lightroom, I will hop to Photoshop as well as necessary. Okay. If Photoshop is something you want to learn, or Lightroom is something you want to learn, we also have a Photoshop class. If you could share a link to that, please, Rob. And I'm going to be sending out an email. I don't know if any of you here are currently signed up for the Lightroom course. We just uploaded the first 2 lessons. So there are some lessons for you to start watching. And as soon as I finish this live, I actually have to go make some more for you. So if you are signed up to the Lightroom course, there are lessons coming, and we will have the live ones very soon as well. All right. Thanks so much, Dave. That's awesome. Thank you very much for saying so. Great editing demo. You missed 2 weeks. We missed you, Vicky. It's been nice outside here in Edmonton. I know. It's tempting to stay inside, to stay outside. Stephanie, if you log in now to your courses, you will see lesson 1 and 2. So as soon as we are done here, you can get started with the Lightroom course. Can't wait to get rid of Adobe. I know a lot of people are definitely in that camp, Edmund, and I still think I still believe that Luminar is one of the answers. It doesn't do things like metadata, and that is an issue. But I'm actually going to be reviewing some things like my Leo and his Sire, and other things that do those things in conjunction with and will work well with Luminar Neo. Another one that I've seen use is Photo Mechanic. So 2 softwares that you have to buy and pay for once versus the script subscription. Okay. Thanks, Nancy. Did you see I did your image earlier of the church? If you missed it, you'll have to catch the replay, Nancy. Thanks, Petra. Good to see you. Thanks, Marty. I think you have a ghost in that image, Marty. I think that's what's happened. And your ghost scared Luminar Neo, and then it crashed, right? Obviously, or it didn't like my editing, clearly. So give that a go and see what you come up with. As Rob says, please give us a thumbs up on your way out. Thanks for watching. We're going to sign out. It's a beautiful evening here in Edmonton, Alberta, and I hope to see a lot of you next week or the week after. Oh, I'm waiting, Dave. I'm waiting with bated breath. Thanks, Heather. Look forward to seeing you. Is there a way to edit the data for copyright? Currently in Neo, no. That's one of the issues. So that's metadata. That is considered metadata. And as I said, some of the alternatives that I'm looking at that you might want to look into would be something called Exire. I'll just type that in the chat. Another one that I've heard of is Photo Mechanic. And I haven't checked any of these out myself yet, but I will be doing some reviews, as well as something called My Leo. And that one is sort of more of an organizational thing that works with your photo editor. So again, I can't really speak to any of those. I've just heard good things about all of them. So if any of you are using those, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Holly says Marty needs an exorcism. Well, maybe his photo does. That's it. It did look like a monster, don't you think? Took a whole page of notes. Awesome. I like that. And of course, this video will be here immediately on our YouTube channel. As soon as I end the broadcast, you can go back to the beginning and start again. And if I talk too fast for you, because people say that a lot, watch me at 0.75 speed on YouTube, and then you can watch me at your own speed, right? All right. So thanks, everybody. Here's a question. Oh, Rob has a question. Heather. Oh, there we go. Okay. Got it. Not sure which editing program to start with. I have hundreds of fine art 35 mil slides to get digitized. What are you using now, Heather? Like, what is your primary? Because I use Lightroom as my main, or my base as my main editor, and then I personally use Luminar Neo as a plugin. Okay, but you can use Luminar Neo as a standalone, which is what I was doing today. Right. If you're going to be doing restorations on things, you may need Photoshop, but you may be able to use Neo. If you are beginner to photo editing, my recommendation is Luminar Neo. And previously I would have said Luminar AI, but now I feel like Luminar Neo is at this place where it definitely replaces Luminar AI, I believe. Luminar AI is still supported by Skylum, but I think eventually everybody's going to move to Neo. Capture One is another similar program. Lightroom is a database. Luminar Neo is a database. Capture One is the same. Capture One is more expensive than Lightroom, and honestly, I don't use it. It's more, well, if anybody here uses Capture One, I think somebody said that they did. If you use Capture One and you prefer it, then I know it's a good program. It's just not one that I personally have used. And I think the learning curve on that one is fairly steep as well. I find that for beginners, especially, the learning curve on Luminar is more, gradual, as opposed to straight up, which is Lightroom and Photoshop. All right. I hope that I answered that question. Does Neo help with cataloging and indexing, etc.? It does in some regard, Heather. So let me just, I'll pop back over here before we leave, because I want to make sure I answer your question for you. Because you can do, like over here, you can make things called albums, right? So for example, when I did the recent update video, these are the images that I used for that video. So I put them into what's called an album, right? So these are just virtual collections. So you can use albums to sort out your images that way, right? So these are all ones that I've used for the course and so on, right? You can also flag and tag them. So you can like your image or add it to your favorites. What it doesn't have that Lightroom has is number ratings, like 1 to 5, or color ratings. Now, I do believe they had that in older versions of Neo. I haven't used Luminar AI for a while now, so older versions of Luminar. So they may add that back in. Whether or not they're going to add metadata is still up for debate. They haven't said that they are. I don't know how complicated that is to code, right? So it has an issue of coding the software. But I hope that helps answer your question in terms of how you can organize things inside your catalog, right? Who are you talking to at U Servicio? A su Servicio? Al Orden. Who are we speaking Spanish with today, Rob? Sounds good, Heather. Yeah, check in with Lightroom next week. And if you don't have Lightroom, I don't even know if they have a trial on it anymore with Adobe. Come back next week, same time. And if you have questions about anything we're doing, and you can kind of then see the difference between what I did today and what I'm doing next week in Lightroom, and see which one you like. Okay, so Edmund says, and this is in regards to Capture One, I think it's great, but it's very complicated, right? So if, as you say, you're a total newbie, then honestly, Neo. Just get Neo, sign up for the course, and I'll walk you through everything you need to know. And actually restoring some old photos is something that has been requested by my students to do, so I may be adding that. Where am I? I may be adding that either as a new lesson or something I will add into my YouTube channel. So, all right. Next week, we have Daniel Korzanowski as our guest. It's going to be me and him, two professional photographers editing. And hopefully, because we missed him last week, so hopefully he's going to be here next week, and we'll be showing you Lightroom. Okay. Thanks everybody for sticking around. It was an epic session tonight. Have a great day or evening wherever you are and wherever your journeys take you, and hope to see you next week right here on our YouTube channel. Take care.